Now that you found this perfect idea, you're probably thinking, okay, next year I'm gonna launch it, it's gonna be amazing. But just step back for a moment and think about how to approach it, because that's a pretty big step. Think about, or get feedback from people, talk with everybody, and see what they think about your idea. See if there's a demand. However, don't listen to everybody, even though you should get feedback and see if it's valuable. Try to make your own mind, because if I would have done that and would have gone with the feedback from everybody else, my startup wouldn't have existed. That would have been very sad. Now, another thing that's really important and that shouldn't make you go forward without it is having a co-founder. Because if you have no co-founder, there are some obvious stuff, like for instance, you can share your workload. However, if you have no experience before and have no co-founder, you have big trouble later on when everything will start to grow. And that's not only my opinion, it's also the opinion of one of the most prestigious accelerator programs in the world, which is the Y Combinator. And the president of Y Combinator says that it's better to have no co-founder than to have a bad co-founder. But still, it's better to be a solo founder. Think about that for a moment. And one of the companies that got out of the Y Combinator is Dropbox. I guess everybody knows Dropbox here, right? Well, how did they start? Actually, I have quite a remarkable story, because the founder forgot his USB stick in a bus twice, and then he was just thinking, well, why don't we have those USB sticks? They're boring. They just put it up to the cloud. And instead of going in and writing the software right away, he got out and met with a lot of potential customers. Those customers offered him to pay for the product, even though the product didn't exist. He showed them a fake version that worked, but of course it was just fake. And by doing that, he got feedback on how it should look, what it should be able to do, and also got money without having to raise money right away from investors. Now, you might think that Dropbox is a case which is pretty far away. It's a story like maybe 3-4 stories that might not happen that often. It's also kind of put together with luck, but that's not always the case. For instance, in my case, I had no experience in founding startups or in companies. I had no capital. I never founded a company before. In fact, I was still a student, going to school, and not getting taught how to found a startup at school anyway. However, one of the most important lessons you need to learn is probably to hang on. And I have another story here from a friend of mine that basically wanted to put a warm beverage and a cold beverage into one bottle. She even talked to many manufacturers and saw how it might work, and it was doable. There even was a demand. She checked with many potential customers, but at some point just died because it was too complex to build. Who knows what it would have been today? But after you get over this phase of, is it doable or not, you will make your first impression. And unfortunately, it's not like in many movies where you just go to parties every day and the business just continues growing. It's more like having many nights that are sleepless and where you have to work on a deadline, which is really important, which might put you out of business if you're not managing to do it in time. And also, a mistake that many people do is managing people wrongly. Because if you can't manage people, you would have a big problem. And you're not learning that anywhere. Then, after you do those steps, you will have to launch at some point. You're probably preparing it pretty well. And you should also think that you should not launch it after polishing everything correctly. If you have a hardware product, that should be the case. But if you're in the software business, you should get out as soon as possible, even if the product is not finished, because you can update it later. Now that you have everything prepared, you're probably thinking it's going to get huge and a big bang with the launch. However, it's not like a simple ride from A to B on a bicycle. It's more like a pretty complex way to getting somewhere. And even though this might look already complex, in most cases not even going like this, it's going like this and then falls down. So if you have this imagination that you just write an app, let's say Flappy Bird or Candy Crush, and the next morning you wake up and have like 1 million downloads, that might happen, but in most cases it's just luck, and you shouldn't bet your company on luck. So better have a plan and work hard, and also neglect your personal need in favor of the company so that you can get it further. Besides that, you also heard today that you shouldn't just do it for the money, because if you do that, in most cases, at some point you will have so much stress that you will just think, why am I doing it? You just quit. I have a next slide which basically shows our progress at the beginning. As I mentioned before, basically we are a software company, and once we launched, we had a few downloads, nothing too fancy, and even though it was okay, not what we expected, it was fine. But let's get back to this later and talk about elevating the business. And you need to understand here that basically your product is just a tiny plus point. It's not the major deal. Marketing and corporations are, in 99% of all scenarios, more important. Because if you're trying to get into an established market, it's going to be pretty hard otherwise. Maybe you have thought of a product that you just bought and it was like, this is a shitty product, where am I buying it? Where they have a great brand. For instance, would you buy an iPhone or rather a phone for 300 euros, which is better? Probably an iPhone. Another thing is that you should think big and don't go for short-term success. Because another company might go for the big deal and get you out of business. Unfortunately, you also need capital to grow it at some point. You won't be able to grow it without money, and that's actually a pretty sad thing. However, you probably saw some shows like Shark Tank or Höhle der Löwen in Germany, and it's not like that. You're not just going into a room, pitching your idea for 1 minute, and then getting 100,000 for, let's say, 10% of the company. It's more like communicating with investors over a period of many, many months, and then it might not even work. We've been talking to many investors, and we've been waiting for the perfect fit, because it's also about working together. And if you have complications or there's many discussions in the board, the company will at some point have problems. Another thing you need to understand when talking with people is that your idea is worthless. This doesn't only apply to investors, it also applies when talking in general to get feedback. Because I have an example, for instance, and execution time is way more important. For instance, there were many companies like Netflix, before Netflix even existed. They tried to offer a streaming service, but the internet was so slow that nobody wanted to wait 3-4 hours for a video to start. They went bankrupt, and a few years later, Netflix, the company that was offering DVD renting, switched their business model to offering a streaming service. Anyway, it's pretty huge. That pretty much shows how timing is more important than the idea itself, because the idea was already there. And then you have limited resources, especially if you start right. So maybe think twice about buying the new fancy iPhone for $1,500 and invest that money more wisely. Because every time you get new money from investors, you're diluting down, and by diluting down, you lose control of the company. So if you don't want to end up with maybe just 1% of the company, better make sure that you're not going bankrupt or need a lot of money very soon. However, the name of the game, even though it's capitalism at the beginning, is still hiring and networking. Because without a team, the company will fail. If you look at the big companies like, for instance, Facebook, Microsoft, or Apple, the founders had a coaching team behind them from day one. And it's even more relevant if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, because Mark Zuckerberg was the person that was able to go to interviews and talk about his experience or talk about the future of Facebook. He basically learned all the answers beforehand and just read them basically on the paper that he learned before. So instead, the most valuable resource is people in general, because without a great team, the company will basically just fall apart. You can't do everything yourself. And if you try to control everybody and see if they're doing a good job, it will also fail, because you don't have the time to control everything. So define structures, make sure that everybody knows what the person's working on. So for instance, if the marketing department persons are walking over to the PR team and then to the developers and just saying, hey, hi, how are you doing today? It won't work. So you need to elaborate those structures and make sure that they stick to it, to the plan. Besides that, you need to learn from mistakes, because if you don't, it won't go pretty smooth at some point. Now, if you remember the progress image I've shown before, how it went for us at the beginning, it fit pretty quickly after we noticed what we're doing wrong. And it started to scale pretty quickly. And then, basically, the red dot is where we learned. But just to recap, the most important points, basically to get feedback from other people, see if there's demand, and make out your own mind. Don't just take everything for granted. And also, most important of all, try to find a co-founder, because without the person that is helping you, it will be pretty hard. Now the bigger question is, what will you start up?